Step aside, Richard Petty. There's a new king in NASCAR. Yep, I'm not even going to play this game. I'm just messing with you guys. Please don't click away out of anger. I'm just messing with you guys. But we do have to react to today's Auto Club race. So let's do that. How's it going, you guys? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. And yeah, like I said, we're talking about the Auto Club 400, which I just got done watching, and of course, I have some of my own thoughts I'd like to share. I also posted a poll on Twitter. I'm gonna look at the results and see what you guys thought of the racing today, and then I want to, of course, look at the top finishers, talk about some of their days, and rate this race on the Groovy gauge. So we got a full show here. Hopefully, you enjoy it. Let's get started. I have to start, however, by talking about the winner of this thing. Kyle Busch, yes, got his 200th career win across all three NASCAR National Series. It's his 53rd career Cup Series victory, and it's his second win in a row after winning last week at ISM. He was untouchable most of the day. I mean, briefly towards the end of the race, we thought Keselowski might be faster. For a brief period, it looked like Logano had some speed, but pretty much from start to finish, Kyle Busch was the dominant car in this race. Even though he made a mistake on pit road and got caught speeding in stage 3, he still managed to come back and win it. So that car was dominant. Kyle Busch put on a show, and yeah, he earned this victory for sure. Of course, like I just said, this is Kyle Busch's 200th career win across, the Trucks, Xfinity, and Cup Series combined, which in some people's eyes means you can now mention him in the same sentence as Richard Petty, because Richard Petty also had 200 wins, although all of his were in the Cup Series back in the day. I'm not going to keep feeding into this discussion. I've made a couple videos over the last several weeks giving my thoughts on this. Kyle Busch, right now, I think he's a top 10 driver in NASCAR history. I think he has the potential to one day be a top 5 driver in NASCAR history. I think there's a difference between saying someone's the best driver versus somebody is the greatest driver. The greatest driver in NASCAR history, like when we're talking about greatness, it's Richard Petty. 200 Cup wins, 7 championships. He set the bar so high that every other driver has been trying to meet ever since then. Dale Earnhardt was just trying to catch Richard Petty. Jimmy Johnson's just trying to catch Richard Petty. Kyle Busch, Jeff Gordon, other drivers of this modern era have just been trying to catch Richard Petty, but he set that bar. So as far as greatness is concerned, the history, the legacy, the myth that is Richard Petty, the king, he is the greatest driver in NASCAR history. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's the best and most talented. In my opinion, this might be kind of inflammatory to say, I think Kyle Busch is a more talented driver than Richard Petty. If we take, Kyle Busch is 33 years old now. If we take a 33-year-old Kyle Busch and put him up against a 33-year-old Richard Petty in the same equipment, I think Kyle Busch wins that race, honestly. So if we're going to talk about what drivers have the most talent, Kyle Busch is already top 5 in all-time NASCAR history, in my opinion. But as far as greatness, no. Kyle Busch has 1 championship. He's only got 53 Cup wins, which is still, 11th all-time. Still really good. He's won a lot in the Xfinity and Trucks. He's still great. As I just said, Kyle Busch is a top 10 driver of all time, but he does not yet deserve to be mentioned in the same sentence as Richard Petty, especially when it comes to greatness. So I'm going to leave it at that. Don't want to take away from this accomplishment. 200 wins is a milestone nobody else has hit. I mean, if you look at across all 3 series, the only 2 drivers to do that are Richard Petty and Kyle Busch. So still impressive, still a huge congrats to him. I'll talk more about Joe Gibbs Racing and that 18 team because right now they are the points leader and they continue to pad that points lead with this win here this week. They look strong, and yeah, they're not slowing down anytime soon. I'll talk about the racing itself here in a minute, but for now, I want to look at the top 20 finishing results. So you see there, Kyle Busch gets the win, then a couple Penske guys right there hot on his tail. The top 4 finishers in this race have arguably been the 4 best cars all season long. Keselowski and Logano already have a win apiece. Kyle Busch has 2 wins now in the season. Kevin Harvick does not yet have a win, but he's basically flirted with that top 5 every single race this year, so you tend to think he's going to start winning races at some point, so not too surprising of a finishing result, right here, top 5. Even Kurt Busch there in 6th. I gotta talk about Kurt Busch. 3rd at Atlanta, 5th at Las Vegas, 7th last week at ISM, and now 6th here at Fontana. This is with Chip Ganassi. He is the only Chevy driver to finish in the top 5 this season. That was a stat that Mike Joy mentioned during the Fox broadcast that I did not know. No Hendrick cars have finished in the top 5 yet this year, but Kurt Busch, driving for Chip Ganassi Racing, a car that didn't make the 16-car playoffs last year, he's already got 2 top 5s and a couple more top 10s. Kurt Busch, I talk about how when you put veterans into struggling cars, it makes those teams better. He is the extreme example. He's making this team look incredible. They're going to win a race this year at the rate things are going. I'm shocked. Anyway, applause to Kurt Busch. Kyle Busch, I know, is making headlines with the 200 wins, but his older brother Kurt here, he deserves a round of applause as well. This backs up what we've talked about the last couple weeks. Joe Gibbs Racing and Team Penske are the two best teams in the NASCAR Cup Series right now. They've won every single race this year. Gibbs has 3 wins, Penske's got 2. So right now, Stewart-Haas Racing, who I think was the best team last year, has a little bit of catching up to do. You see the top 8 right here. 3 of the 4 Gibbs cars finished in the top 8, and all 3 Penske cars finished in the top 8. You got Ganassi, you got an SHR car flirting there. Those are the only outliers. It's a Penske and Joe Gibbs Racing dominated series right now, and there's some other teams that can make some noise. Stewart-Haas Racing's not too far off, but that's the way it is, and Fontana continued to show that. I want to give a shout out to Austin Dillon finishing 10th. He ended up starting on pole for this race after that debacle of a qualifying session we talked about the other day, but he started on pole despite coming down with an illness this morning. They had Cole Custer there on standby in case Austin Dillon couldn't go the full distance. He toughed it out. Very impressive, and a top 10 run, one of their better showings of the year, despite even having some damage on that 3 car. Really impressed me. I've told you guys at the beginning of the year, I think this is the chance. This is the first year I think Austin Dillon can really establish himself as a top guy in the sport. I expect Austin Dillon to make the playoffs this year, and I think he could do it on points. I don't think he needs to rely on like a lucky win that he might get at like Daytona or fuel mileage race at the Coke 600. I think Austin Dillon can point his way into the playoffs this year, and it's because of these types of strong performances that I'm sticking by that prediction. Very impressed by Austin Dillon. I'm excited to see what he can do next. Hendrick Motorsports is still struggling. 0 of their cars made it into the top 10 in this race. Jimmy Johnson early on actually looked pretty good. He was running up near the top 5 for the first half of this race. Even Chase Elliott looked like a top 10 car. Even Alex Bowman sometimes looked like a top 10 car. But ultimately, they all faded. And that's what we're left with. 0 Hendrick cars in the top 10. One of them didn't even finish in the top 20. So Hendrick Motorsports still has a lot of catching up to do. At first I thought, okay, maybe Chip Ganassi's the one Chevy team that's better than them. Now I think RCR might even be better than them. So Hendrick Motorsports went from being the top Chevy team, arguably the top team in NASCAR a few years back, to now maybe the 3rd best Chevy team. Maybe that's taking it too far, but I don't know. I'm waiting for them to turn the corner, and it hasn't happened yet. So hopefully they don't continue this plunge too much further. Kyle Larson in 12th is also starting to concern me. The fact that his teammate, Kurt Busch, has 2 top 5s and 2 other top 10 finishes already this year, and Kyle Larson, he's led some laps. He led some laps at Atlanta, looked pretty strong there, but still didn't get a great finish. The fact that Kyle Larson is consistently back here 10th to 12th place, that's concerning to me. It makes me think that maybe Kyle Larson, I don't want to use the word, but I'm going to, maybe Kyle Larson was a little bit overhyped. Great dirt racer, but pavement is different than dirt, and a lot of dirt skills do translate over to pavement, but Kyle Larson, he's been in NASCAR now. This is his, fifth full-time year? 6th, actually? No, it's his 6th. And he has 5 career wins in those 6 years. Remember, it took him a couple of years to finally win a race. That's what we see from a lot of young drivers these days. It took Chase Elliott 2.5 years to win. It took Eric Jones 1.5 years to win. It took Ryan Blaney almost 2 years to win. So, maybe that's just the way it is. But Kyle Larson, I think a lot of people consistently think of him as a top 5 talent in NASCAR. Not just a top 5 young talent, but a lot of people think Kyle Larson's as good as Kevin Harvick or as good as Martin Truex Jr. I think maybe we need to pump the brakes on that. Kyle Larson's great, but he is going through a slump right now, really since the start of last year. Pump the brakes on that. I think Kyle Larson may be a 10th place driver right now. He's still young. I think that may be what he is. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. there in 14th. Solid finish, given that he was really responsible for the only incident of the day, the only real wreck. We had a couple tire issues, tire failures and whatnot happen in this race, but the only wreck occurred on a restart when Ricky Stenhouse Jr. got sideways and spun out in front of the field. But he came back to finish 14th. Ricky Stenhouse doing his thing, and he doesn't seem to care who it hurts. Chris Buescher, another solid top 20. Matt DiBenedetto in there as well. Paul Menard. Eric Jones finishing 19th. The first half of this race, he looked great. He looked like he might almost be as good as Kyle Busch. He was running up in the top 5, drove his way up into 3rd place at one point early on in this race. I was like, dang, Eric Jones, this is the best I've seen him look in his whole career. This is the best race I've seen him put together. Ultimately, stage 3, he just continued to fade and fade and fade. 19th. Really unfortunate finish to what was otherwise, I thought, going to be a pretty decent day. He got some damage during that wreck with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Maybe that ultimately started to hurt his car, hurt his handling as the day went on, but I don't know. Really disappointing. The most notable driver that did not finish in the top 20, Clint Bowyer, actually had engine problems basically from the get-go, ended up finishing last in this race, 38th place, so a tough points day for Clint Bowyer. He does not have a win yet this year, and like I said, Stewart-Haas Racing struggled a little bit. Clint Bowyer, tough points day. No other way to say it. It's early in the season, I guess, but it's rough points day. So there's basically a look at a lot of your top finishers in this race. In a couple weeks, I'll start looking at point standings. We'll start to look at where people are stacking up around the playoff bubble and everything. But for now, still early in the season, just wanted to talk about the top finishers in this thing. So now let's talk about the racing itself. This is the 3rd race this year we've seen with the lower horsepower aero package. This is the second race we've seen with the full version of the aero package, with the 550 horsepower, the aero ducts, and the rear spoiler and all that. This is only the second race. This is the same package we saw at Las Vegas a couple weeks back. California, Auto Club Speedway here is the first 2-mile racetrack we've been to this year, so a lot of people were wondering how the package might look different. We'd only seen it at 1.5 miles to this point. How is it going to look at a 2-mile track? Would it be any different? And ultimately, I don't really know how best to describe it. The racing looked similar to years past. It was closer. Restarts were probably even a little bit more exciting than we're used to seeing at Auto Club. Like, Auto Club typically has pretty exciting restarts. 4 wide, 5 wide consistently. We saw that and even a little bit more in some of the restarts here today. So similar to what we saw at Las Vegas, I think restarts at Auto Club were better as a result of this new package. But once the run started to get longer, again, most of this race was long runs, the cars would still get spaced out, they'd draft on each other, get big runs on each other, similar to what we've seen in Auto Club in years past. I do think the passing was more prevalent this year than in years past. I do think that cars could kind of stay in little groups. You'd see pockets of like 4 cars here, and then like 2 seconds back, another group of 4 cars, and they'd all trade positions with each other. You saw a lot of that with this package, and I think that was a result of the package. But ultimately, I think optically, when just a casual fan flipped on the TV comparing last year's race to this year's race, not a whole lot of difference. Good screenshot right here from Nick Bromberg on Twitter, who I don't always agree with, but I do credit him for posting these screenshots. Helpful information here. You can see right here, this is lap 20 in last year's race. You see Kyle Busch leading, but you can see the gap between first place and 10th place is more than 13 seconds. Compare that to today's race, the gap between first and 10th is only 8 seconds. And you can see generally, people are a lot closer together in this year's race rather than last year's race, where it feels like there's 1, 2, 3 second gaps between a lot of these cars. So I do think the aero package did have something to do with the racing we saw today. Now, I do think Auto Club Speedway is one of the less entertaining tracks on the schedule. It doesn't usually produce great racing. In fact, for years, my least favorite NASCAR race was in 2012 at Auto Club. It was a race that was rain shortened with no cautions, and Tony Stewart won, and it was a terrible race to watch. It was the least entertaining race I'd ever seen until maybe the Clash this year. So Auto Club Speedway and 2-mile tracks in general typically are not my favorite. We've had some good finishes at Auto Club. I think back to 2011 or Harvick versus Johnson, or 2013 with Logano versus Hamlin. We've had some good finishes, but as far as like the full 400-mile race is concerned, generally Auto Club falls flat, in my opinion. And I think this new package this year helped the racing a little bit, but it kind of made the racing go from not that great to maybe okay. That's what I would say. I think, typical Auto Club races, in my opinion, are kind of not that great. This package this year made this race maybe okay. That's what I'm going to say. That's my hot analysis for the day. I know, aren't I just an expert? Really good at painting a picture for you guys, but that's the best I could do to describe it, honestly. I was curious to hear what you guys thought about the new aero package at Auto Club, so I asked you guys on Twitter, do you think that this new aero package made the racing at California better or worse? And here is what you guys, how you guys responded. Most people said it stayed about the same, but clearly a lot more people thought it improved the racing when compared to like last year's race. So it sounds like most of the fans that watched the race today probably weren't, I don't think very many fans loved the racing they saw today. It wasn't the most entertaining, but when compared to past Auto Club races, I do think today's race was maybe slightly better. And it looks like most fans kind of back me up on that one. But of course, I want you guys to let me know down in the comments what you thought of today's race. Did you hate it? Did you enjoy it? What were some pros and cons of the package? I did a video after the Las Vegas race where I kind of told you guys the pros and the cons of this new aero package, and I think a lot of those are still applicable to Auto Club Speedway, but ultimately, I think I summed it up a minute ago. Auto Club Speedway usually is not that great a race. I think the package this year helped make it slightly better. But with that being said, let's go to the Groovy Gauge. I gotta give you guys my final rating for this year's Auto Club 400. Up to this point, the first 4 races this year, I've given all positive reviews on the Groovy Gauge. Unfortunately, I think that streak does have to be snapped. I'm a realist. I'm positive. I'm positive about the sport. I enjoy racing, so it takes a lot for me to not like a NASCAR race, because if I didn't like most NASCAR races, I wouldn't keep watching them. But that being said, the Auto Club 400 today, I'm going to give it a 45% on the Groovy Gauge, slightly below average in my opinion. Now, if we're going to compare this race to past Auto Club races, it might be a little above average probably, but compared to your average NASCAR race, it's a 45%. It was a slightly below average race. I mean, it had intriguing elements. The restarts were better than we usually see. There was a pretty good amount of passing even during long green flag runs. Kyle Busch having that speeding penalty and having to fight his way through the field was pretty interesting. So this race wasn't a total dud, but I think it would have been a lot more entertaining if it was like an hour and a half long, maybe 2 hours long. The fact that it was still a 3 hour long race, I think definitely caused it to drag on a little bit. But that being said, I can't really hate on this race that much. it was a solid race. It was an okay race, especially by California standards. 45% though, slightly below average, but let me know what you guys think on your version of the Groovy Gauge. Where would you rate this race? It's probably been my least favorite race of the season so far. Been the least entertaining, I'd say. Checking off my list here, I think that just about does it. I don't really have anything else to say, but I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Out of the Groove. I hope you enjoyed, at least to some extent, the Cup race today. Hopefully next week's at Martinsville. It's a short track, and that's basically kind of my manifesto at the end of this video is more short tracks, please. Especially not, I really don't want more 2-mile cookie cutters like this. 1.5 miles, I can do with a few of them. Like, we don't need as many as we have now, but a few 1.5 miles are fine. I like 1.5 miles from time to time. There's some good ones out there. But these 2-mile tracks, California, Michigan, I don't really like them. I'm sorry, they're probably my least favorite tracks on the NASCAR schedule. You know, I'd even throw Pocono in there. I know it's 2.5 miles, but it drives like it races like a Michigan or an Auto Club. So those 3 tracks, even throw Indianapolis in there. Yeah, I guess that's another flat 2.5 miler. Those 4 tracks now, I'm just adding more and more to the list. Those 4 tracks, probably my 4 least favorite in NASCAR. So I could do without some of them and maybe throw a couple new short tracks in there. More short tracks, please. Maybe we could see that happen in a couple of years. I can dream. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. As always, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram. I tweet all about racing, talk all about racing over there. Then remember, you can also get yourself an Out of the Groove t-shirt down in the description. If you want to help support me, support the show, you can check that out. Also, send me some cool stuff to my P.O. box if you want me to shout you out and show you off in an upcoming episode. Or I'll show off the stuff you send me, I guess, not you. I'm not going to take you out of the box and be like, look at George here, haha. I'm going to show the thing you send me. Anyway, I digress. Thank you, of course, also to my Patreon supporters. Michael Harrison at Gwiz of the Stars, SelfishGifts.com, Mentally Defective, Cameron James, John Koblenz, Tim Shingen, Jason Arlong, Wesley Donaldson, Isaac Dennison, Mika Suzuki, iFantasyRace.com, Adam Lean, and the rest of these amazing Patreon supporters. Thank you all so much for the continued support. It helps me do bigger and better things with this show. I got some exciting things planned over the next couple weeks, and a lot of it is due to the support I get from you guys, so thank you. Should have a couple new episodes up later this week, but yeah, other than that, subscribe if you're new so you don't miss any more NASCAR news, updates, and all that type of stuff. I'll see you guys again very soon. Have a good rest of your weekend, everyone. See you in a couple days. Bye-bye, y'all.